Jasmine had just finished a long day at work, and all she wanted was to relax. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's name, and life moved at a steady, peaceful pace. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the neatly trimmed lawns and rows of modern houses. Jasmine, a young black woman in her mid-20s, had just moved into this neighborhood a few months ago. She was new to the area but already felt a connection with the community. She enjoyed walking through the streets after work, taking in the peacefulness that came with the end of the day. Jasmine had grown up in a busy city where noise and chaos were the norm, so this kind of quiet was something she cherished. Tonight, like many others, she decided to take a walk down her street and clear her mind. The air was cool, and everything around her seemed to glow with a calm serenity. As she walked, her mind wandered. She thought about her work as an undercover FBI agent, how she was always on the move, always pretending to be someone she wasn't. Most people had no idea what her real job was. To them, she was just another young woman with a steady job, a new house, and a normal life. But Jasmine knew the truth. Her work took her into dangerous situations, far beyond the normal suburban life she was trying to enjoy tonight. Sometimes she wished for an ordinary life, but that wasn't the path she had chosen. Lost in her thoughts, Jasmine didn't notice the HOA security officer standing at the corner of her street until she was nearly right in front of him. He looked like he was waiting for something, his posture stiff and rigid. His uniform was neat, but there was something about his attitude that rubbed her the wrong way. As she walked past him, she heard him call out, "Excuse me, miss. Can I have a word with you?" Jasmine stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. The officer was older than she had expected, probably in his mid-40s, with a stern look on his face. He wasn't tall, but he had the kind of confident air that suggested he wasn't someone you'd want to mess with. His badge gleamed under the setting sun, and his eyes were focused and calculating. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, her voice calm but guarded. She wasn't one to back down from anyone, especially not in her own neighborhood. "You've been walking around here for the last half hour, and I need to ask you a few questions," he said, his voice cold and official. "Are you a resident here?" Jasmine frowned. She hadn't seen this officer around before, and something about the way he spoke made her uneasy. "Yes, I live here," she replied. "Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "I've noticed you walking up and down this street several times today. I've been keeping an eye on things, and it's a little suspicious. I need to see your ID." Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. It wasn't uncommon for neighborhood security to be a little overzealous, but something about this officer felt off. He wasn't asking politely, he was demanding. And that didn't sit well with her. "Is there a reason you need my ID?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just taking a walk. I live here, and I've done nothing wrong." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at her with a mix of suspicion and authority, as though he didn't believe her. Jasmine could feel the tension building between them. It wasn't just the officer's behavior, it was the way he seemed to be assuming she was doing something wrong without any proof. His judgment was clouded by something, perhaps her being new to the neighborhood, or maybe something else entirely. "I'm going to have to insist," the officer said, his voice sharp. "Show me your ID, or I'll have to report this." Jasmine felt a flash of irritation. Who did this man think he was? She wasn't a criminal, and she certainly wasn't going to be intimidated by someone who clearly had a power trip. But at the same time, she knew she had to be careful. She wasn't just any woman on the street, she was a trained FBI agent, and her job often required her to remain calm and composed in situations that could quickly escalate. "Why don't you call whoever you need to call to verify who I am?" Jasmine suggested, her voice cool. I'm not showing you my ID without a reason. The officer's face flushed with anger. I'm asking you nicely, miss. You need to cooperate. Now. Jasmine stood her ground, refusing to give in. She could sense the officer's frustration growing, but she knew that her calm demeanor would make all the difference. She wasn't going to let this man push her around, not now, not ever. I'm not your criminal, officer, she said, her voice low but firm. I'm just a woman taking a walk in my neighborhood. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with the people who hired you. The officer looked taken aback by her response, but his authority was clearly challenged. He stepped closer, and Jasmine could tell he was about to escalate things further. But just as he opened his mouth to say something, a thought crossed her mind. She wasn't just an ordinary woman, and this wasn't just an ordinary confrontation. She was an undercover FBI agent, trained for moments like this, moments where things could quickly spiral out of control. Without missing a beat, Jasmine stood up straighter. She locked eyes with the officer, her gaze unwavering. Her voice didn't shake as she spoke, but she made sure he could hear the seriousness in her words. I am an FBI agent, Jasmine said slowly, deliberately, as if emphasizing every word. And I'm on a case that's far more important than whatever small rules you think I'm breaking. Now, unless you want to make this a bigger issue, I suggest you step aside. The officer stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Jasmine could tell that, at first, he didn't believe her. It was hard to blame him, who would think that a young black woman walking in the neighborhood was an FBI agent. But Jasmine wasn't lying, and she wasn't afraid. She'd dealt with much worse situations than this. The officer blinked, taken aback by her sudden revelation. But Jasmine didn't back down. She was no longer just a resident in a quiet neighborhood, she was someone much more dangerous than he could ever imagine. And for the first time in a long while, the officer seemed unsure of what to do next. Jasmine's calm confidence and quiet strength were enough to shake him, but she knew this encounter was far from over. What started as a simple walk in her neighborhood was about to take a turn, and Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. The tension in the air was thick, and Jasmine could feel it building. The officer stood there, frozen, staring at her with disbelief. She wasn't sure what he thought of her declaration, but it was clear that he wasn't prepared for this. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Jasmine's heart was calm, her mind sharp, but she knew that the situation could escalate quickly if the officer wasn't careful. The officer took a slow step back, as if processing the words she had just spoken. His face went from confusion to annoyance, and Jasmine could see the wheels turning in his mind. He didn't want to believe her, and part of him probably thought she was bluffing. Who would have imagined that someone like her, walking through a quiet suburban neighborhood, could be an FBI agent? Well, if you're really an FBI agent, the officer said slowly, trying to regain control of the situation, then you should know that I'm just doing my job. His voice had shifted, but there was still an underlying hostility in his tone. Jasmine could tell he was trying to find a way to bring the confrontation back under his control. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had dealt with far more dangerous people than this officer. I understand that, she replied, keeping her voice calm but firm. But you're harassing me for no reason. You stopped me without cause, and I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. The officer's eyes narrowed, and for a second, Jasmine could see the flash of frustration cross his face. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like she didn't pose a threat. But Jasmine knew better than anyone that looks could be deceiving. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said, almost as if talking to himself. He was still trying to assert some level of control, but his confidence was slipping. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice or make any threats. She simply stood her ground, her posture straight, her expression unshaken. You don't want to make this harder, Jasmine said, her voice quiet but full of authority. "You're the one who approached me and started this, not the other way around. All I'm asking for is respect." The officer seemed to hesitate for a moment, as though trying to find the right words, but nothing came. Jasmine's calmness, her composed demeanor, was slowly starting to break down the walls of authority he had built for himself. It wasn't easy, but Jasmine was used to this. She had faced much tougher situations in her career, where lives were on the line. Here, in this suburban neighborhood, the stakes were different, but the principle remained the same. She wouldn't back down. "I'll need to call it in," the officer muttered, his hand reaching for his radio. "Just to verify your story." His voice was strained, and Jasmine knew this was the moment when he realized he had made a mistake. He was losing control, and it was clear that he wasn't sure what to do next. Jasmine watched him as he fumbled with the radio, trying to reach someone in the HOA office. She could see his frustration mounting. His face was flushed, his movements quick and jerky, as if he was trying to save face. Jasmine stood quietly, not saying a word. She knew the officer's desperation meant he was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding anymore. "I'm not waiting for you to call it in," Jasmine finally said, breaking the silence. "You've made your decision, and now I'll make mine." Her words were decisive, her voice unwavering. She wasn't going to let this man hold her hostage in this standoff. The officer's head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, clearly caught off guard by her sudden change in tone. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. The officer watched her, unsure of what to expect. As the phone rang, Jasmine's eyes never left him. She wasn't just going to stand there and let him dictate the situation. She had more power than he realized. After a few seconds, someone answered on the other end of the line. "This is Agent Jasmine Green," she said, using her cover name. "I need you to verify something for me." The officer's eyes widened as he watched Jasmine speak so confidently into the phone, his disbelief growing by the second. He didn't know who she was talking to, but the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, made it clear that she wasn't just a regular person. She was someone with authority, real authority. Jasmine continued to speak into the phone, giving brief details of the situation, her calmness in stark contrast to the officer's nervous energy. The officer could no longer pretend that this was just some misunderstanding. Jasmine wasn't bluffing. He could see it in her eyes. She was serious, and she wasn't going to let him continue this farce any longer. After a few more seconds, Jasmine ended the call. "Now that we've got that squared away," she said, putting her phone away, "I think it's time we wrap this up." She didn't need to elaborate. The officer knew now that she had the backing of someone far more powerful than him. His posture slumped, his confidence shattered. You're an FBI agent," the officer stammered, now completely unsure of himself. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a statement of disbelief. Jasmine nodded slowly. "Yes, I am. And while I'm sorry that this misunderstanding happened, I won't tolerate being harassed in my own neighborhood. So, if you don't mind, I'd appreciate it if you could let me go." For the first time, the officer's face shifted from anger to embarrassment. He was defeated, and he knew it. His bravado had evaporated in the face of Jasmine's calm but unyielding presence. He had tried to challenge her, to exert his power over her, but he hadn't realized who he was dealing with. With a final glance at Jasmine, the officer muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jasmine watched him go, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. But she also knew that this wasn't the end. The confrontation had shown her something important: there were people who would try to abuse their power, no matter the consequences. And Jasmine wasn't going to let that slide, not in her community, not in her world. As the officer walked off, Jasmine let out a deep breath. She had handled the situation, but she knew that being an undercover FBI agent meant she couldn't let her guard down. This was just the beginning of something much bigger, something far more dangerous than an overzealous HOA officer. But for now, she was satisfied that she had kept her cool, standing up for herself in a way that left the officer with more than just a bruised ego. Jasmine turned and continued her walk, the peaceful suburban neighborhood around her now feeling a little less serene. But as she walked, she couldn't help but smile. This moment, small as it seemed, was a reminder that justice could come in many forms even in the quietest of places. The officer walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet neighborhood, but Jasmine didn't feel entirely at ease. She knew this wasn't over. While the confrontation had ended with her maintaining control, there was a sense that things had just started to shift in a way she hadn't anticipated. She continued walking down the street, her mind processing what had just happened. Her footsteps were steady, but her thoughts raced. The officer's disbelief when she told him she was an FBI agent hadn't surprised her. Most people wouldn't expect someone like her, young, black, and walking alone in a quiet neighborhood, to be involved in anything as serious as federal law enforcement. And that's exactly how she liked it. Being underestimated was one of her greatest assets. It made her job easier, and it allowed her to gather information without drawing attention to herself. But the officer's reaction had been different. There was something about him that made her feel uneasy. His attitude was more than just disbelief, it was something deeper, something that hinted at a lack of respect. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that the officer had been looking for a reason to challenge her, that his actions had been driven by something personal. But what? She didn't have all the answers, and she certainly didn't have time to dwell on it. She had a job to do, and right now, that meant staying focused and alert. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Jasmine pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a message from her supervisor, Agent Daniels. The message was brief, but it was exactly what she had been expecting. "Meet me at the office. We need to discuss the recent activity." Something's off. Jasmine frowned. She had a pretty good idea of what that meant. The investigation she had been working on for the last few months had taken some unexpected turns. She had been assigned to a high-profile case involving organized crime syndicates operating in multiple states, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized that nothing was as simple as it seemed. There were too many connections, too many layers to peel back, and she was starting to wonder if she was getting too close to something bigger than she had anticipated. Jasmine was no stranger to danger. Her work as an undercover agent had taken her into the darkest corners of the criminal world, places where lives were on the line every second. She was used to working in the shadows, used to keeping a low profile. But today, with the interaction with the HOA officer, something had felt different. It was like she was being pulled into a larger web, a web that she didn't fully understand yet. She glanced around as she continued her walk, making sure no one was watching her. Her training had taught her to be observant, to read people and situations before they even had a chance to escalate. The neighborhood was still quiet, but her instincts told her that this was only the calm before the storm. She had to get to the office and find out what Agent Daniels had discovered. After a short walk, Jasmine arrived at her car and slid into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, and she navigated through the streets, her mind focused on the message from Daniels. She had always trusted him, but even he had his limits. There were too many unknowns right now, and she needed answers. As she pulled into the parking lot of the FBI office, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Daniels himself. She answered it immediately. "Jasmine, good to hear from you. I'm glad you're on your way. We've got a situation," he said, his voice calm but serious. "What's going on?" Jasmine asked, her tone matching his. She knew from experience that when Daniels spoke like that, it meant something major was unfolding. "Meet me in the conference room. I'll fill you in when you get here," he replied. Jasmine parked and headed into the building, her mind racing. The office was bustling with activity, but she didn't pay much attention to the other agents. She headed straight for the conference room, where Daniels was already waiting for her. "Jasmine, take a seat," Daniels said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. He was a tall man with graying hair, a sharp mind, and a no-nonsense attitude. He had been with the FBI for over 2 decades and had seen more than his fair share of dangerous cases. Jasmine sat down, her gaze never leaving Daniels. "What's the situation?" she asked again, more urgently this time. Daniels leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "We've got a leak," he said simply. "Someone in the department has been feeding information to one of the syndicates we're investigating. And I have reason to believe that the leak is someone close to you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of leaks in the past, but never anything this personal. She had worked with the FBI long enough to know that betrayal could come from anywhere, but to think that someone within her own circle might be involved was a blow she wasn't prepared for. "Who?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was trying to stay calm, but the realization that someone she knew could be involved was unsettling. Daniels hesitated for a moment, then slid a file across the table toward her. "We're still putting the pieces together, but it's looking like the leak might be someone you've been in close contact with. The HOA officer you encountered today, he's part of a larger operation." Jasmine froze. The officer? It couldn't be. But then again, the way he had approached her, the way he had tried to exert control over her for no reason, it made sense. He wasn't just some random neighborhood cop. He had a connection to something much larger, something more dangerous. "I need you to look into it," Daniels continued, his tone steady. "This goes beyond just the HOA. We have to find out who's behind it, and fast. The leak could compromise the entire operation." Jasmine nodded, her mind racing. The officer wasn't just a small-time security guard, he was part of something much bigger. And she had unwittingly crossed paths with him. Now, she was caught in a web of corruption and deceit that ran deeper than she had imagined. "I'll start digging," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "But I'm going to need more information. I don't trust anyone at this point." Daniels stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. "I know you don't. But this is what we're up against. We've got to figure out who's pulling the strings and stop them before they do any more damage." Jasmine stood up as well, determination settling in her chest. This wasn't just about an HOA officer anymore. This was about something much more dangerous. The hunt was on, and Jasmine wasn't going to stop until she found the truth, no matter where it led. Jasmine felt the weight of the conversation with Agent Daniels still hanging in the air as she left the office. She had never imagined something like this could happen. The HOA officer she had crossed paths with earlier that day was now at the center of an investigation much larger than she had initially thought. What had begun as a simple, unnecessary confrontation had opened a door to something far more dangerous. The implications were heavy, but Jasmine couldn't afford to let her mind wander too far. She had a job to do, and this case had just gotten more complex. As she stepped into her car, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Daniels: "Stay alert. We've confirmed his ties to the syndicate. He's been gathering intel on you." Her stomach tightened. Her instincts had been right, the officer wasn't just a random nuisance. He had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to make his move. And now, Jasmine was firmly in the syndicate's sights. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove, the world outside her window blurring with the speed of her thoughts. She knew she needed to act fast. If the officer was connected to the syndicate, there was no telling what kind of damage he had already caused. But Jasmine had been trained to handle situations like this, situations where the lines between right and wrong blurred, where trust was a luxury that she couldn't afford. As the minutes passed, Jasmine's mind raced through every possible connection, every detail she had picked up over the past few months. She had been undercover for a long time, but this was different. She wasn't just infiltrating a criminal network, she was fighting back against an enemy who had infiltrated her own world. And the worst part was, she didn't know who to trust anymore. She pulled into a secluded parking lot, far away from the office. It was late, and the streets were empty, but the silence felt suffocating. Jasmine took a deep breath and reached for her phone again, this time dialing a number she hadn't called in months. It was a direct line to one of the few people she knew she could still rely on. His name was Mark, a fellow agent who had worked with her on several high-risk assignments. Mark was tough, but more importantly, he was smart and trustworthy. If anyone could help her navigate this mess, it was him. The phone rang twice before Mark picked up. "Jasmine." His voice was low but concerned. "What's going on?" "I need your help," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her mind. "There's been a breach, and I'm trying to get ahead of it before it's too late. The HOA officer I encountered today? He's connected to the syndicate. He's been gathering intel on me. And I think it's only a matter of time before they make their move." Mark was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "How sure are you about this?" he asked. "I'm certain," Jasmine replied. "I've been going over everything, and it adds up. They've been tracking me, trying to find weaknesses, and I'm the target. I need to know where they're hiding, and I need to find out what they know before it's too late." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Mark spoke again. "Okay, listen to me carefully. You're not alone in this. I'll make some calls and get you the backup you need. But you have to keep your head on straight. If this is what I think it is, they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't get to the truth." Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had always known that she couldn't do this alone, but hearing Mark's words made her realize how much she needed the support of the few people she trusted. "Thanks, Mark," she said, her voice softer now. "I'll keep my head in the game. I need you to dig into the officer's background. We need to know who he's been in contact with, and if there's anyone else in the department who might be compromised. We can't afford to miss anything." "I'll get on it," Mark replied. "Stay safe. I'll call you with an update as soon as I have something." After the call ended, Jasmine sat in her car for a moment, staring at the screen of her phone. The quiet around her seemed almost unnatural, but the stillness gave her time to think. She knew this was bigger than just one rogue officer. The syndicate she had been investigating was deeply entrenched, and now, they had set their sights on her. She needed to be careful. Every step she took from this point forward had to be calculated. There was no room for mistakes. Jasmine had seen firsthand how far the syndicate was willing to go to protect their operations. They were ruthless, and now they were personal. The officer, who she had initially thought was just a small-time security guard, was connected to something much larger, a network that stretched far beyond the boundaries of this quiet neighborhood. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't just facing criminals anymore, she was facing a well-oiled machine that knew how to cover its tracks. And she was right in the center of it. As she drove back toward the office, her mind shifted back to the officer. She couldn't let him slip through her fingers. He was the key to everything. The information he had gathered on her was only the beginning, but if she could track him down and get him to talk, she could finally break the case wide open. The office lights were dim when she arrived, but she didn't hesitate. She parked quickly and headed inside, her steps purposeful. The silence inside the building felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jasmine walked straight to the back, where the team worked. She found Agent Daniels in his office, pacing back and forth. "Jasmine," Daniels greeted her, his voice tight with urgency. "I've got news. We've traced the officer's movements. He's meeting with someone. It's time to move." Jasmine's pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady, her focus sharp. The team quickly mobilized, and Jasmine could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was about to confront the officer this time, with the full force of the FBI behind her. But even as the team prepared, Jasmine couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something about this was too easy. It was almost as if they were walking into a trap. But she wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let them win. "Stay sharp," she warned the team as they moved out. "We don't know what we're walking into. Don't assume anything." And with that, they set off, determined to uncover the truth no matter where it led. The city felt different as Jasmine and the team moved through the streets, their mission clear in their minds. The stakes had never been higher, and with every passing second, the urgency increased. They were about to confront the officer, the one who had unknowingly set them on a path to uncover something much larger than a simple neighborhood disturbance. The officer was just one piece of a much more dangerous puzzle, and they had to act fast before the syndicate could do any more damage. Jasmine's mind was racing, but she kept her focus. She couldn't afford to let doubt cloud her thoughts now. The officers around her were just as determined, and with Daniels leading the charge, Jasmine knew they had the best team for the job. But something still gnawed at her. The sense of impending danger was palpable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "We're almost there," Daniels said, breaking the silence in the vehicle. His voice was steady, but Jasmine could tell he was thinking the same thing she was. The closer they got, the more they realized that this was no longer just an investigation. It was a full-on operation, one that had implications beyond anything they could have imagined when they first started. Jasmine glanced out of the window, watching the city pass by in a blur of lights and shadows. The office building they were heading toward wasn't far from where she'd met the officer earlier. The quiet suburban neighborhood now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the sharp edge of the city's bustle. As they pulled up to a quiet alley behind the building, the team disembarked quickly, each agent moving with purpose. Daniels turned to Jasmine, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We don't know how many people he's meeting with. Stay alert." Jasmine nodded. The air felt thick with tension, and her senses were on high alert. She moved with the team, her mind focused on the task ahead. They reached the back entrance of the building, where they had tracked the officer's last known location. The door was unlocked, which only added to the unease simmering inside Jasmine. "Ready?" Daniels asked quietly. Jasmine gave a small nod, her hand instinctively resting on the sidearm at her hip. She wasn't worried about being armed. She was worried about the unknown. What had they walked into? Who was waiting for them inside? The team moved into position, their movements silent and coordinated. Jasmine's heart was pounding, but her breath remained steady. She had faced life and death situations before, but there was something about this moment that felt different. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was personal. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside. The building was dark, save for the soft glow of overhead lights flickering in the distance. The corridor stretched out in front of them, and Jasmine's mind raced as she processed every detail. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the silence, and Jasmine knew they weren't alone. They moved quickly but cautiously, following the sounds of voices coming from a room at the end of the hall. Jasmine's instincts were sharp, and her heart rate quickened. They were getting closer. As they neared the door, she gestured for the team to stop. They crouched low, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The voices grew clearer, and Jasmine could make out snippets of conversation. They weren't talking about anything she recognized, just quiet exchanges about meetings and arrangements. It sounded harmless, but Jasmine knew better. This was the moment that could make or break everything. "On my mark," Daniels whispered. He was close behind, his hand raised in a fist. Jasmine nodded, signaling that she was ready. 3, 2, 1, at Danielle's signal, the team burst into the room, moving fast and precise. Jasmine was right behind him, her eyes scanning the space for threats. The officer they had been tracking was standing by a desk, facing a man in a suit. The room was dimly lit, but Jasmine could make out the officer's face. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected to be interrupted. Before he could react, Daniel stepped forward, his voice commanding. "FBI. Step away from the desk." The officer froze, his eyes widening in shock. The man in the suit, however, didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and smirked, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "Agent Daniels," the man said, his voice cool and collected. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jasmine's pulse raced. This man knew Daniels. He knew the FBI. The officer's connection to the syndicate wasn't the only surprise here. It seemed like they had walked into the lion's den. "You should have stayed away from this, Mr. Kent," Daniels said, his voice sharp. "You and your associates are about to be arrested for conspiracy, bribery, and a whole lot more." Mr. Kent's smirk deepened. "Conspiracy? You're the one who's been running around in my backyard, Agent. You've been following me, tracking my every move. But you've been blind to what's really going on." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. Kent didn't look like a man caught off guard. He looked like a man in control. "We've been following you for months, Kent." "Your operation is over," Daniels said, his tone unwavering. Kent stood slowly, his hands held out in mock surrender. "You think so? Because what you don't know, Agent Daniels, is that this operation is just beginning. You've been chasing shadows." Jasmine's mind was working furiously. She couldn't let Kent get away with this, not after everything they had uncovered. She moved toward him, her voice steady but intense. "What's the real story, Kent? Who's pulling the strings?" Kent looked at her, his eyes calculating. "You're too late to understand the bigger picture. You're all just pawns in a game you'll never win." Before anyone could react, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Kent smiled. "It's already over, Agent. You're surrounded." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. This was a trap. The syndicate had set them up, and they had fallen right into it. The sirens weren't for them. They were for something else. But Jasmine wasn't about to let this end here. She reached for her radio and spoke quickly. "We need backup. Now." The room erupted into chaos as agents scrambled for cover. Kent's smirk grew wider, but Jasmine knew one thing for sure: this fight wasn't over. They had stumbled onto something far bigger than they had expected. But they weren't going to back down. Not now. As the tension in the room mounted, Jasmine locked eyes with the officer, now just another pawn in Kent's game. The truth was out there, and Jasmine wasn't going to stop until she had it. The syndicate might have thought they had won, but this was just the beginning. Jasmine's mind raced as she prepared for what was next. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun.